Happy World Tourism Day, everybody. Welcome to Arizona State University's webinar on the nexus between tourism, peace, and sustainability. This webinar is hosted by the Center for Sustainable Tourism, which is located in the School of Community Resources and Development here at Arizona State University. Our theme for this webinar is inspired by the United Nations Tourism Agency, which, as you all know, declared that this year's World Tourism Day theme is tourism and peace. We are pleased to welcome over 140 registrants to this webinar. Many of you are joining us from other nations, and we recognize that it is likely either too early or too late for some of you. So if you cannot accompany us for the entire 90-minute session that we have organized for you today, please know that we will be sending out a recording of the webinar, so you have a chance to listen to it later. By way of introduction, my name is Christine Buzinde. I am a professor and the director of the School of Community Resources and Development here at Arizona State University. Today, I have the privilege of moderating this panel discussion. Joining me are three phenomenal panel members who will discuss various aspects of peace and sustainable tourism. I will go ahead and briefly introduce each of them. With us today is Dr. Dallen Timothy. Dr. Timothy is a professor of community resources and development at Arizona State University. He's also a senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He's also visiting professor at Ningxiang University in China and a visiting professor at the Erasmus European Masters of Tourism Management program, which is based at University of Girona, Spain. He researches geopolitics, heritage, and development in the Global South. Also on the panel is Dr. Anna Farmaki. Dr. Farmaki is an assistant professor at the School of Tourism Management, Hospitality, and Entrepreneurship at the Cyprus University of Technology, located on the beautiful island of Cyprus. Her research focuses on tourism planning and tourism development, as well as tourist behavior. Last but not least is Dr. Gyan Nyaupane. Dr. Nyaupane is a professor in the School of Community Resources and Development at Arizona State University. He currently serves as the interim director for the Center of Sustainable Tourism. His research interests include understanding the role of tourism in sustainable development, tourism resilience, global South, and indigeneity. He is the editor-in-chief of the journal Tourism Review International. Today, each panel member will deliver a 15-minute presentation that captures their unique scholarly insights into the nexus between peace and sustainable tourism. Dr. Timothy will start us off with a presentation titled, "What is Peace? Tourism as an Instrument for Peace." Dr. Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Buzinde. I appreciate that introduction, and it's great to be here with everybody, and great to be with the other panelists, and I thank the registrants for being here as well. So I just want to start out. I'm going to share my screen here. Sorry. If I can find it. Okay. Can you see that all right? I think so.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. And if I put it on full screen, okay. So as Christine mentioned, my purpose here is to rethink the relationships between peace and tourism. And so I'm going to do this from a very holistic perspective. And hopefully we'll stimulate some discussion and some different ways of thinking about this topic. Peace is essentially it's more than simply the absence of war or the absence of conflict. And often we think of it as being that sort of binary perspective, which it isn't. It does include harmony, inner calm, justice, understanding, and balance. All of these are principles of sustainability. And as my friend Nimit Chaudhary said, peace is the cornerstone of human well-being. And peace is contentment on many different levels and scales. The UN Tourism Organization says peace is a way of life, whether it's finding inner calm, building bridges, fostering social harmony, nurturing the environment, or uniting nations. And guess what? Tourism can be a key in all of those. And then Omar Mufakir and Ian Kelly said in 2010, Even if there is no armed war or conflict, some people suffer from diseases that are preventable, and some starve to death, although there is enough food on earth. Some are denied a decent education, housing, an opportunity to play, to grow, to work, to raise a family, to have a right of freedom of speech, or to take part in the governance. So these simple quotes really do illustrate the fact that there's many different dimensions of peace. So how does peace manifest? I'm going to go through these rather quickly to get more to the specific tourism components. There's several ways in which peace manifests. There's what's referred to as inner peace, which deals with personal harmony, tranquility, self-seeking, overcoming one's existential crises, immersive experiences, and spiritual and mental health. Those are all symbols and manifestations of inner peace. Interpersonal peace are things such as harmonious relationships, respect, kindness, empathy, and friendliness. Economic peace, sustainable livelihoods, poverty alleviation, financial abilities to be able to support one's family, satisfy one's needs. Environmental peace, sustainable growth, respect for nature, efforts to protect nature and culture, food and water security, appreciation of the world around us. And then, of course, there's social peace, things such as indicators such as community solidarity, cohesive community, altruism, volunteerism, sense of belonging, and personal and cultural identity. International or political peace entails good relations between countries, cross-border cooperation, a lack of aggression, conflict, and mutual assistance and collaboration. So we get specifically then into how can tourism, in fact, contribute to peace in all of these ways that we've just discussed. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are essentially a recipe or a set of instructions for peace, all of them. And tourism does have a role to play in that. So let's start from the beginning again, but at this time it now includes tourism and its role in this. Inner peace and tourism. So these are all elements, motivations, experiences that people seek for this building of inner peace. Relaxation, time to unwind. Spiritual explorations, which includes pilgrimages, formal and informal pilgrimages. Mental and physical health through travel and holiday. Deep and immersive experiences, getting to know oneself, particularly in challenging situations. Slow tourism has often been cited as a way of developing a deeper inner peace. And self-discovery through things such as personal heritage, a sense of belonging, whether that's belonging to a community, belonging to some affinity group, and a sense of purpose in a very difficult and chaotic world. Tourism can help with interpersonal peace as well, because travel can help create an understanding of different cultures and traditions. This has often been maintained as one of the outcomes, the positive outcomes of travel. It can reduce or eliminate prejudices. And the operational word there is can. It doesn't always, but it can. It can build bridges and heal hearts. It can build respect and empathy between people. It can help develop mutual understanding. And bonds can be created between the hosts and the guests. Economic peace and tourism. Everyone wants economic peace as well. And tourism can contribute to economic peace through improved regional development. Tourism supports other sectors, such as agriculture and fishing and forestry, other sectors with ripple multiplier effects. Tourism can help alleviate poverty, particularly in rural areas, and we've seen a lot of this going on in recent years throughout the world. Tourism can create livelihoods and stimulate entrepreneurial activity. Tourism can provide a rationale for a higher quality of life, such as healthcare facilities, educational opportunities, and better quality public services. Environmental peace and tourism. Tourism can promote, it has the potential to promote conservation. It can promote harmony with nature. It can help fund restoration. When managed properly, tourism can avoid causing major ecological impacts. Tourism can seek ways to mitigate climate change. Through economic means, tourism can encourage local residents to protect their environments and cultures. Social peace and tourism manifests when community development occurs through tourism, when solidarity within a community pride and identity is created, which can happen because of tourism, as I said before, if it's managed in the right way and sustainably. It can foster a sense of common identity. It can help protect cultural traditions. Volunteer tourism is often cited as an example of this. Social and political empowerment can occur through social peace and tourism. And then, of course, access for all. And this includes both physical access, market access, economic access, etc., for both tourists and residents. And I really like this picture that I found on Google showing it illustrates this idea of access for all and increases peace for those who might have mobility issues. International peace and tourism. So tourism has been actually known to stimulate international agreements. It has been known to create treaties and cross-border cooperation, these sorts of things. Cooperation in promoting environmental causes, etc., even regional marketing. Tourism can stimulate dialogue between opposing sides, between collaborative sides, and tourism helps bring down many barriers through debordering processes, for example, and increased human mobility. I don't have time to go into a lot of these details, each of these, but I'm just trying to provide a very big outline of a lot of different ideas. But this idea of debordering and increased human mobility, we've seen a lot of this, and we've seen the opposite of this in recent years as well. But tourism does have the potential to contribute to increased mobility. Now, clearly, tourism is not the panacea for all of the peace movements in the world. And some people have even said, some observers have even said that you have to have peace to have successful tourism. And that's not necessarily true. A lot of people travel to find peace. A lot of people travel to be able to establish their own identities, and this is a sense of peace. But we all know, and I've presented a very positive perspective so far, but we know that not all outcomes of tourism promote peace. We hear a lot of these buzzwords now. So you can see over-tourism, social stress and discontent, inflation, gentrification, which pushes people out of their traditional home areas. We know that there's cultural commodification, cultural appropriation, tons of environmental problems, exploitation of local people, climate change, the problems associated with seasonality, and economic leakage. These are all issues we know that are not peaceful relationships between tourism and the other. But I hope we can look on the bright side. I've tried to emphasize the positive elements because today is the World Tourism Day. And so with their theme of peace, I just want to point out with this slide that even though we've looked positively so far at everything, it's not all roses. It's not all beautiful. And it's not all, what do we say, rosy. In conclusion, there are many different ways in which peace manifests in people's lives. Interpersonal, social, economic, environmental, etc., as I've noted before. Peace is so much more than just simply an absence of war. That is a very small perspective on peace. When we have people who are hungry, we have children who don't have shoes to wear or schools to attend. This is not a peaceful situation. Peace is far broader and more encompassing than just an absence of war. Some critics say that peace, as I mentioned before, peace must prevail before tourism can exist. This is not necessarily the case, and it definitely depends on what kind of peace we're talking about. Tourism has a lot of potential to help foster peace in many forms, in all of those forms that I just talked about. It has a role to play. And these fosterings of peace is done primarily through people-to-people contact, personal reflection, deep and immersive experiences, ensuring that tourism provides adequate livelihoods, caring for the environment and culture, and respecting other people's differences. Tourism it has the potential to be a significant tool in bringing people together, educating people about the importance of protecting heritage and nature, and ensuring that every person and every place can experience at least some degree of peace. In today's difficult world, with poverty abounding, economic hardships afflicting billions of people, and social and political conflicts dominating the news headlines every day, we need to think of ways in which we can, as individuals and communities and scholars, foster peace at every level, large scale down to the personal scale. However, tourism is not, like I said, a cure-all for all the ills of the world. In fact, tourism is known to increase peacelessness and conflict with its negative impacts and challenges. Nevertheless, we have reason to be optimistic as tourism continues to grow, although alternative tourisms and alternative destinations should definitely be explored. So thank you all for your attention, and I hope that has raised some questions in your mind, and I will turn the time back over to Dr. Buzinde.
Thank you, Dr. Timothy, for starting us off and for giving us those insights. Next off, we have Dr. Farmaki, whose presentation is titled The Tourism Peace Nexus. Dr. Farmaki, the floor is yours.
You are muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and can you see the slides?
Absolutely.
Great, great. Thank you very much for having me. This is a very important topic to discuss, and something that I've noticed actually today when I logged on in social media, because it's already Saturday around 2:30 in Cyprus. A lot of people from my network were commenting about today's theme. I don't remember maybe last year or a few years ago, so many people, whether they are academicians or students or even policymakers, bringing up on World Tourism Day the specific theme. And I think one of the reasons why everyone wanted to share an opinion today is because we probably need peace today more than ever, at least in the last few decades. And I believe that we can all agree that there is a rise in sociopolitical instability worldwide, even in places where we took for granted peace and stability and safety. I believe that we see this is not something we can take for granted anymore, as there is an increase in interstate conflict, in intrastate conflict. So in this context, it's not surprising that peace has been included as a sustainable development goal in the United Nations Agenda 2030. It represents sustainable development goal number 16. And it is important not because we need peace today more than ever, but peace is also required for sustainable development. So peace in a way contributes to the achievement of other sustainable development goals, such as partnership. Now, where does tourism fit into all of this? Tourism may not have been, at least initially, acknowledged as a target in the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal number 16, but the World Tourism Organization recognizes that tourism has a potential role to play in terms of contributing to reconciliation, to peace building. And in my view, this can happen both directly and indirectly. So indirectly, because tourism is an economic activity, so it brings revenue, it creates jobs, and improves the standard of living in destinations that invest on tourism development. So in a way that addresses issues such as poverty, inequality between societal groups, and so on. Directly, tourism can also contribute to reconciliation and peace building because it's a social activity, and as a social activity, it means that one group of people will interact with another group of people. So when you have opposing groups, because of traveling, their relations can be restored, stereotypes can be alleviated, perceptions can be improved, and overall, the relations between nations can improve because of tourism. Now, based on this argument that tourism can contribute to peace, there is a burgeoning stream of research already that has accumulated. I think the pioneer of the peace through tourism tenet was Louis D'Amour, and in a conference that took place in Vancouver in 1988, he invited researchers to examine, to research the role of tourism in peace. The initial studies that emerged following that conference were conceptual in nature, or they looked at attitudinal and perceptual change of people visiting an opposing group. Since we have seen a lot of studies that have emerged and enriched the literature, and this focused on different geographical contexts, for instance, Korea, Ireland, the Middle East, and so on. And they adopted various perspectives, looking at specific aspects that relate to tourism and peace. Travel motives, the role of museums in peace building, the effect of sanctions, or even the role of businesses in promoting peace in conflict-affected destinations. So
Dr. Farmaki,
yes.
Can I interrupt you for a second? You are sharing the entire screen. Can you just share the PowerPoint, not the entire screen?
You just need to move your side. You just move your cursor on the side, because I think right now it's pointing towards the.
What can you see now? Because I can see the full screen.
Maybe you can unshare and then share only PowerPoint presentation. Maybe
Okay.
unshare first, stop sharing, and then share again.
Okay, let's. How about now?
Still, you're sharing the entire screen.
So I'll maybe just move your cursor away from the part that says share. That's all. I think it should be fine.
Now? Is
Yeah,
it
I
working?
think just go ahead. Yeah, just go ahead. Just go ahead.
I think it should be
Anna.
fine. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So based on this extant literature, what we can deduce is certain areas that, in my view, pose critical aspects that we need to consider when we examine tourism and peace. So the first problem is that findings have been insofar inconclusive. So we have studies that have found some hopeful evidence that tourism can contribute to peace. On the other hand, we have studies that do not confirm this. The other issue that we can detect with literature is that it's quite fragmented and very contextual based. So what that means is every study has looked at a specific context, but conflicts tend to differ from context to context. So because of these issues, it's very difficult to take some generalized findings from the literature and build a specific theory of tourism and peace. The other issue is that many studies have drawn from student groups, from student samples that have visited an opposing group as part of some kind of a study program or an exchange program. So the question here is, how can we generalize from these student groups? Do these represent the entire population, for instance? And another issue is that many studies have adopted the contact hypothesis, which basically means that because we travel, we come into contact with an opposing group or members of an opposing group. So because of that, we are in a better situation to understand each other, and our relationships will be improved and peace will eventually emerge. But this is quite romantic to assume and simplistic. So what we also need to consider is that tourism is a political tool. So it can be used in order to marginalize certain groups from the society in terms of decision making. tourism is also an economic activity and can be used as an economic tool. So it can actually become a source of economic competition over resources between opposing groups. Another issue with tourism is that frequently we commodify culture, heritage. So how do we present heritage and how do we interpret heritage when we have a case of opposing groups in a specific destination, for instance? And at the end of the day, we need to acknowledge that tourism is a commercial activity. It has a commercial orientation. Tourists often travel in what we call the tourist bubble, and they don't really have any meaningful contact with the host community. So in a paper that I co-authored with my colleague, Dimitri, we basically argued that for tourism to contribute to a sustainable form of peace, it first needs to eliminate these economic, social, political inequalities that may exist between opposing groups. Now, based on this criticism related to the peace and tourism nexus, I wrote a paper that was published in Tourism Management in 2017. So the following slides are based on that paper, and I will try to very briefly discuss certain aspects that I think are important. And at the time, I thought they were missing from the literature. So the first thing that I argued was that we need to bring back conflict into the discussion of tourism and peace. So looking at this table, and I'm going to go very briefly over this, we need to acknowledge that we have, according to Galton, two types of peace. The first is negative peace, which basically means that there is no violence, there is no conflict, but of course we can agree that that is not really the peace that we want in a society. We want a more positive form of peace where there is prosperity, justice, equality, and so on. So what happens when a war or a conflict ends? The first stage is done by the politicians, the military leaders, track one actors, and the aim is to settle a conflict, meaning, we just sign a truce, basically. The second stage is to resolve a conflict, and that involves track two actors. So conflict professionals, various other groups will get involved trying to address the cultural violence that exists in a place, the structural violence, and so on. But in order to achieve a more sustainable, more positive form of peace, what we need to do is actually transform a conflict. So this means that we need all the track 1, 2, 3 actors, including members of the society, meaning civilians, to actually address the causes of conflict, to transform a conflict, and plant the seeds of peace that will last forever, if possible. Now, in terms of tourism, starting from the bottom of this figure, like I said, many studies have drawn from specific contexts. Every context is different because conflict will happen, will emerge, and will escalate and de-escalate for different reasons. So we need to acknowledge in the context that we are studying why a conflict happens, how we can eliminate those causes of conflict. And we also need to acknowledge, when we are researching tourism and peace, various other aspects, such as how long did the conflict last? Usually, the longer the conflict lasts, the harder it is for reconciliation to happen. What is the gap in terms of ethnic division? What happens with external stakeholders, such as tour operators or tour guides? What about animosity perceptions that may exist, or resources available by each group? And at the same time, we need to acknowledge certain characteristics of tourism when we examine tourism and peace. Not every form of tourism can contribute to peace. So mass tourism implies that there is some kind of a passive interaction between the visitors and the host community. So how people travel, what form of tourism are we going to develop in order to contribute to reconciliation is important, as of course are the various tourism actors involved and the sectors involved. So it's not just the public sector, but the private sector businesses have a role to play, civilians, but also external stakeholders like tour operators. And when we discuss the role of tourism, we need to acknowledge that tourism has an economic, social, political, and environmental dimension. So all of these need to be considered, in my opinion, when we examine tourism and peace. And as a conclusive slide, I developed this continuum in order to portray in a way the potential role that tourism can have on peace building. So on the positive side, tourism can contribute to peace, especially when we want to transform a conflict, when we want to establish a positive form of peace. But having said that, we need to acknowledge that not every form of tourism can be as successful in achieving this. We need forms of tourism that will promote meaningful intergroup contact, that will promote thick stakeholder participation and be impactful. On the other side, once a conflict ends, because tourism and travel can't really happen at times of war, we may have a form of tourism developing that is more mass-based, and it can actually inhibit reconciliation and peace because the focus will be entertainment. Intergroup contact may not be necessarily meaningful, and so on. It's very important, though, to also acknowledge the possibility of tourism acting as a substitute to reconciliation and peace. And what do we mean by this? Is instead of having various strategies in a place where there are opposing groups that will actually promote meaningful contact and will actually promote reconciliation efforts, it's possible that tourism will substitute all of these efforts. And we use it in a way as a safe method or a safe strategy, a safe tactic to interact, but not necessarily in a meaningful way so that a positive form of peace can emerge. So this aspect I've discussed in the paper that I aforementioned, the Tourism and Peace Nexus, and invited researchers to consider this in their methodologies when they are examining the Tourism and Peace Nexus. So to sum it up, we need to consider conflict. We cannot discuss tourism and peace without acknowledging the conflict context. And we also need to consider the full extent of tourism as a social activity, an economic activity, a political tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Farmaki, for that wonderful presentation, and please pardon the interruption earlier. Next up, we have Dr. Nyaupane, who's going to present on tourism as a path to peace through meaningful contact. Dr. Nyaupane, the floor is yours. And I think you're muted.
Let me share my slide. Thank you so much. Do you see my slide?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. So for the next few minutes, so I'm gonna decode some of the assumptions we had made. Tourism contributes to peace, but how? Is there any theoretical foundation to discuss those assumptions? So I'm gonna spend a few minutes in discussing those ideas. So according to United Nations World Tourism Organization, 1.3 billion international arrivals in 2023. So that is only 20% of the total tourists. So that doesn't include domestic tourists. So if you add 80% of domestic tourists, domestic travels, that's altogether it will be 6.5 billion total travels annually. So that's a lot of people interacting each other when tourism takes place. Millions and millions of people they interact with each other as a tourist, with group guests, with providers. So there's a lot of interactions in tourism phenomena. So tourism is usually defined as an economic activity. We always measure tourism based on how much dollars it generates and things like that. But tourism is more than economic activity. This is a social, political, environmental phenomena that brings people of different culture, different race, different religion, ideology, heritage together, and that leads to contributing to broader social goals, including peace through cross-cultural tourism, cross-cultural understanding. So I don't want to repeat this again. The previous panel members talked about United Nations goal, and one of the goals is peace and justice. So the peace and justice is part of sustainability. After 2 world wars, 40 years of Cold War, the world is still facing regional confrontations, interstate and inter-state conflicts. And a lot of these conflicts are rooted in geopolitical rivalries, resource competition, social, religious, cultural, and ideological differences. And a lot of times there's a lack of trust and misunderstanding among countries and ethnic groups and cultures. And that turns into conflict such as violence, war, terrorism. And classes of civilization, this is from Huntington. He wrote a book about classes of civilizations and he said classes of civilization are the greatest threat to world peace. So the root cause is simple. Root cause is us versus them, in-group versus out-group. And then us is, we are better, we are wiser, we are moral, we are more worthy. Our food is tastier, our music is better, our language is more logical. These are all we-ness. Whereas them is, they are threatening, angry, unworthy, poor, lazy, and that's them, right? That's the distinction between us and them. And Haidt, he talked about us and theming is more emotionally driven than cognitively driven human phenomena, human attitude, human behavior. So use cognitions for post hoc justification after they emotionally divide us and them. So Allport, Gordon Allport, he wrote this book in 1954, 80 years ago. And this is a seminal book on the nature of prejudice. So he wrote this book, middle of civil rights movement, and he talked about stereotype, prejudice, and what are the solutions to mitigate some of these issues. So stereotype is common. It's a categorizing people, labeling people, judging people, generalizing people. That's all stereotype. It could be negative stereotype or positive stereotype, but we'll be focusing mostly negative stereotype, which leads to prejudice, which is thinking ill of others without sufficient warrant, or negative attitude toward an individual or group. So all these prejudice and stereotype arises from ignorance and segregation between groups. That's his idea. So, and in his book, he came up with this contact hypothesis, later known as contact theory. And the theory says intercultural interaction helps decrease people's prejudice, reduce stereotype and conflict, and increase tolerance and acceptance. So through reducing psychological, cultural, and social distance between people, I think I'm emphasizing social distance here because the term social distance has been misinterpreted during COVID-19 as social distance was taken as a physical distance. So social distance is the degree of closeness or acceptance that individuals or groups feel toward others. This is not the physical distance we use in COVID context. But he came up with some key conditions. The contact between two groups, contact between two people, does not automatically bring successful, contact in intergroup context. So Allport, he came up with four conditions that can make the contact more successful. One is equal status. So to avoid reinforcing existing power imbalance, the status of two groups should be somewhat equal in terms of power, in terms of a lot of other things, economy and class and things like that as well. There has to be shared goals. The groups should have a common goal. A perfect example could be a team with different ethnic groups, different racial groups playing together, and then they have the same goal. The goal is to win the game, right? So that having common goal help build that intercultural connection. And the third one is intergroup cooperation. So based on intergroup cooperation, based on cooperation rather than competition. And the last one is institutional support. There should be institutional support from authorities, laws, and customs to have this successful contact. There have been a lot of studies on these contact theories, and then his students and a lot of other scholars, they started doing more research on this topic. And then they came up with 4 additional conditions that are essential for successful intergroup contact. Voluntary participation. The participation has to be voluntary instead of forced contact. The connection, the interaction has to be intimate, not just casual interaction. It has to be. It has to have no extreme negative attitude in the beginning. If there is extremely negative attitude in the beginning, the bringing 2 groups together is not going to resolve the problem. And the contact has to be more sustained. It's not just one-time contact, but the multiple times, deeper contact. So these are additional conditions they proposed. And then they conducted a study of a meta-analysis of 516 studies back in 2006. And then they found all kind of results, all kind of conditions, and these conditions came from these studies. And one of the findings from that meta-analysis was 6% of these studies had no effect or they increased prejudice instead of reducing prejudice. So there are some application of this contact theory in policy as well. Desegregation policies within the US and other countries, diversity initiatives, equal opportunity employment, affirmative action, peace building efforts, immigration policy. These are all, these are all the influence of this work Alport initiated. So let's talk about the power of tourism. Tourism is without a doubt one of the most important forces shaping our world in a negative or positive way, but we can talk about positive way because it brings people together. It's in a different settings, in non-structured, voluntarily, preventative, long-term. So there are these interactions are more organic. And then there are a lot of countries which are politically divided. Same families, same culture. All of a sudden they're divided by border. 2 different countries now, they can't even visit their families each other. Example could be Pakistan and India, China and Taiwan, South Korea and North Korea. These are all politically divided countries and states. And then tourism can be a tool to bring people together. It's a low political activity. It's a soft power. If you look at the picture on the top, these are the mainland Chinese tourists who came to Taiwan for the first time in 2011 as an independent tourist. So Taiwan was open for independent Chinese tourists in 2011, and these people were just there for the first time seeing the island. And the bottom picture is the project. It's a Kumgyang project in Korean Peninsula. This project was initiated by Hyundai Group in South Korea, and this resort is in North Korea. So the goal was to bring South Korean tourists to North Korea so that they can start building relationship through tourism that could be part of unification project. But that project was suspended because of conflict. But this is one of the examples of how tourism can help initiate this peace process. So people-to-people diplomacy is important. It's not just the diplomat and politicians' responsibility to build peace. People millions of people. As I said earlier, they travel to different countries, different states. They also have this power and responsibility to have that diplomacy. There are a lot of research within tourism in terms of is how tourism can help this cross-cultural understanding. These studies are mostly done with pre-trip, post-trip comparison. They do survey prior to the trip, survey after the trip, and look at how tourist attitude changed after their trip. So most of these studies were done with the students because that's the easy population to study. And then these are not just the students, they are part of, they are also, young people experiencing different cultures, different countries. So a group of students were studied, Australian students and teachers who participated in the educational trip to Israel. They were studied, and participants became more tolerant toward Israelis and their culture after the trip. This is based on TAPT study. Peers did one study with tourists visiting Morocco and Greece, and then they didn't. Their findings were it didn't improve their attitude. Pizam, Jafari, and Millman, they did another study with American students visiting former USSR, and the results were mixed. There are more empirical research. Lidwin did a study with students traveling Singapore and Egypt, and their findings were again mixed. Attitude toward the Egyptian people negative, attitude toward Israeli positive after the trip. We also conducted this study. A colleague of mine, Victor Tay, and our former graduate students, Cody Parrish, who did this study with study abroad students who visited South Pacific and Europe for their 5 weeks study abroad program. And we did a survey with them in the beginning and at the end. And we also had a control group to make sure that this group is not biased. And then our finding is, again, it's mixed. Attitude change positive toward Europeans, negative toward Australians, and it was mixed toward Fijians. And these are, the attitude questions we used. There are 23 Likert type scale we use to measure the attitude. And this is attitude toward Fijians. You can see, I'm not going to go through these numbers, but you can see the results were mixed. We also did a study, all-inclusive German tourists visiting Turkey. We conducted this study with colleagues, Erzen Sirakaya and Muzo. And then again, this study was not as we assumed. Prejudicial attitude toward the host did not change or increase after the trip. So why are the outcomes mixed? There are a number of reasons. One is situational. Relationship between two countries, they change when they visit these countries during this, really bad relationship or, this kind of situations. The attitude change actually that happened with the students when they were visiting Australia. There were a little bit of tension between America and Australia in terms of Iraq war, and then there was, that was impacted during the survey as well. So type of experience they have as a tourist, the experience with the trip, the interactions they have with locals, experience they have with non-tourism services, such as police, customs, experience with guides. These are all, all important factors in changing these outcomes. And sometimes these prior attitudes are, if they are too negative, it doesn't improve. Sometimes their prior expectations are too high. So when they visit, these expectations do not meet, and then they are negative. In conclusion, simple contact between host and guest does not necessarily promote peace automatically. So contact has to be, below the surface. It must reach below the surface in order to alter negative attitude. There should be conducive conditions to have this positive attitude, but tourism industry do not really look at this environment. How do we create this environment so that the people can change their attitude after their trip? It's not even considered in tourism industry. Peace tourism is full of promise, but the tension between peace and tourism has to be untangled. There are in tourism is a potential, but we have to bring this and do more work on untangling these complex situations. There are some methodological challenges as well. These are mostly short-term trips, one-time study. There's no lack of longitudinal study, so the methodological challenges are there as well. So I'm going to end my presentation with this, my favorite quote, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Thank you, and back to you, Dr. Buzinde.
Thank you, Dr. Nyaupane, and thank you to all our panel members for your generous insights on this subject matter. I would like to inform our audience members that we will now segue into the question and answer part of the webinar. I have a set of 6 questions for the panel members that allow us to delve deeper into the intricate connections between tourism, peace, and sustainability. I would also like to invite you, our audience members, to ask any questions that you have. So please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom screen to type and send your questions to us. We will address your questions after the panel has responded to the 6 questions I have for them. Okay, I would like to start with you, Dr. Timothy. Can you please share with our audience why a discussion on the nexus between tourism, peace, and sustainability is relevant in this junction of time in society? In other words, what is happening in society that makes this topic on peace and sustainability relevant, and how is tourism implicated?
Wow, that's a great question, Christine. And I think a lot of it in my short presentation, I addressed a lot of that, but I'd like to make a few points in addition to that. This is a very relevant question, and obviously a very relevant topic, as UN Tourism has recognized in sort of branding today as looking at the relationships between peace and tourism. Obviously, we live in a very contested world where politics is extremely prominent in everyday life, and we see it on television all the time. There's political upheaval, there's political discontent, there's social discontent, there's economic discontent, and all of these forces together, I think, are just creating this sense of peacelessness within people, not just within states, but within people. And so people are seeking personal, interpersonal and interpersonal, and all those pieces that I talked about before. And so it's an extremely relevant time to discuss that. And we actually need more research into these different manifestations of peace and how tourism can be implicated in helping to develop those, or maybe even create the peacelessness. But we're more taking the optimistic approach and saying that how can tourism really improve peace? It's just a timely topic now with all the chaos in the world. And I think of the rising generation, the young people of today, and the challenges that they face are very different to the challenges that we faced as young people. And I think there's a different way of viewing satisfaction with travel and expectations with travel. And I think peace is something that people are beginning to expect from their travel experiences, depending whatever scale of peace it might be. So world conditions, political, economic, social conditions in the world are just ripe now with the need for more research and understanding on the relationship between peace and tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Timothy, for those insights. My next question, if I may, Dr. Farmaki, I'll ask you to address this. Can you share with us what some of the key contributions are in terms of scholarship made by tourism scholars who are working on the linkages between peace studies and sustainability?
Well, like I said in my presentation, we have now a rich body of work that has been published on peace and tourism. And I think in recent years, we went beyond, looking at perceptual change. And we now have studies that are very insightful in terms of the role of museums, sanctions, studies that may not directly focus on peace, but they look at animosity and travel decision making. So, they have some kind of an indirect relationship, let's say, with the peace and tourism nexus. In terms of sustainability, I would say that we still need more work to sort of like bind these three things, you know, tourism, sustainability, and peace. But there's also, in recent years, very interesting studies that came up from specific scholars that are well known in this area that have looked at issues like justice, tourism, justice, and peace. So I think we are moving towards a positive light in terms of research. With, of course, what I said, that we need to look at certain aspects related to conflict. Otherwise, we are running the risk of looking at this peace and tourism interface in such a positive light that we probably ignore some structural issues that might inhibit the contribution of tourism to peace building.
Thank you, Dr. Farmaki. I know in your presentation you mentioned social, environmental, and economic inequalities and how it's important for us to pay attention to that. So thanks for amplifying that, that element. All right, so my subsequent question is directed towards Dr. Nyaupane. Dr. Nyaupane, what is the key role of tourism stakeholders in peacemaking? So if we think of tourism stakeholders as, you know, the industry partners, researchers, and policymakers, what role do they have in peacemaking or peace building?
That's a good question, Christine. I think tourism, there are no other industry or any other form of economic, social, political activity that bring that many people together, right? Tourism is powerful in a way that it brings a lot of people together. And then a lot of times, tourism industry looks at how tourism can be, activities can be promoted post-conflict, right? You know, tourism, actually there is a peace tourism company, you know, they promote tourism in war memorials, taking tourists to Hiroshima, taking tourists to concentration camps. I mean, these are all post-conflict tourism activities where tourism, so basically tourism is seen as not as a tool to create peace, but peace as a condition for tourism. Or so that's how tourism is, peace is treated in tourism. And I think we can switch that and then make tourism as a tool in different ways. So one is tourists are just considered as customers, right? You know, they are individuals who are buying product, you know, buying your trip, and then you can sell them. So they are just buyers, they are just customers, right? But their role is different. You know, when people travel, they actually, I've seen a lot of places where, you know, people travel as a tourist and then they became the great advocate of that country. So in the long run, these people are, these tourists are advocating for the entire country, right? And they become, you know, and then tourist can become ambassador too. So there is a tourist can be unofficial ambassador as well, right? But that's, where is that within the tourism framework? You know, there is no such thing in the tourism framework, at least in the industry setting, where, okay, we need to also consider not just business, but also the other aspect of this interaction, right? That's for the industry part. You know, if I have a power, I would reduce military expenses and provide incentives for people to travel, you know. So that probably is more powerful in the long run than spending money on military. And policymakers, I think again, this is wild idea, but you know, one thing, if you look at the economic thing of tourism is considered as an export industry, right? Tourism is just like exporting your computers, exporting your plane, exporting your goods and product from your nation. So tourism is an export. And then, you know, in economics, you know, you try to reduce your import and increase your export to balance your economy, right? And then what it does is it discourages people to travel. It discourages people to travel to other countries. It encourages people to bring, it encourages tourists to bring to your country, but discourages people to go away, which is essential. If you want to make your citizen more open-minded, more educated, more culturally grounded, more world having better world views, you should send those people outside, right? Send those people to other countries so that they can go as a tourist and then bring back more culturally aware information and knowledge, right? But that's not in government policies nowhere. I don't think any government would encourage people to go away and then bring fewer tourists. They want to always, that's at least in tourism industry, that's what the current phenomena is.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nyaupane. I know of some philanthropists that have actually engaged in philanthropic endeavors that allow, for instance, children from economically impoverished locations to be able to travel and come back and bring those insights to help them broaden their horizons as individuals. So I think at small scale levels, there's some of this happening at the philanthropic element, but we don't necessarily have federal policies on these things that allow us to be able to learn from other cultures. As we move to the subsequent question, I want to highlight something that Dr. Timothy mentioned earlier, which is the set of social, cultural, socioeconomic circumstances that we find ourselves in that make this topic that we're discussing today an important one, one that actually resonates with many individuals. As Dr. Farmaki mentioned earlier, social media this was a hot topic on social media today because it's a topic that resonates with many of us. So with that in mind, my subsequent question to the entire panel members is, what are some unexplored angles that future research needs to focus on in relation to our understanding on the nexus between peace, sustainability, and tourism? And I ask this question because our audience members, there are some scholars who are looking for research topics, but also experienced scholars who are trying to, continue their work on this. What advice do you have to share with them in relation to areas that still require our scholarly attention?
I'll take a stab at that first, and I'd like to hear from the other two as well on this same question, because it's really a kind of it's a little bit of a scary question, but also a very a nice, inviting question too, because there is a lot of work to be done, and not to be divisive, but to be more uniting. I'm particularly interested in different cultures and how this has a lot of implications from colonialism and other forces, but different cultures perceive of different phenomena and what causes differences in people's or cultures' perceptions. And I would like to understand more about different cultural perceptions of peace and what that means from different levels, as I talked about earlier. But just kind of to understand what does peace mean in context A, B, or C? And for example, in places where people are experiencing peacelessness or conflict, how do they see peace versus those who might live in relative prosperity or peaceful situations? So I think we can do more sorts of comparative studies without being divisive. And I think, to me, that would be really enlightening, just to see how society's baggage, we could say, affects their perceptions of peace and what it means. That's one perspective, anyway.
Wonderful, thank you. Other committee members, panel members?
Should I go next?
Please do.
Well, you mentioned social media. So I think the role that social media plays, and also the role that we all play in participating in social media and potentially influencing the perceptions of people by sharing fake news. I think fake news was also an important part of the discussion in recent couple of years in terms of conflict. I would also say the role of businesses. If we look at the Russian and Ukrainian conflict, we saw the effect of sanctions, but we also saw businesses deciding to exit the Russian market. So I think the role of businesses in peace building is also interesting. The role of media, like I said, and possibly the role of gender. I think this has not been explored in terms of tourism and peace because, there is this assumption that women are more caring, they are more prone to offering and cultivating peace and prosperity and so on. But I think there needs to be more on that also.
Wonderful, thank you. Any additional thoughts, Dr. Nyaupane?
I think the question is, what are some of the unexplored research within this topic, right, Christine?
Absolutely.
I think we probably need to have more transdisciplinary work to contribute to tourism, and this body of literature. There are a lot of psychological research in psychology, research in sociology, not just these disciplines, but I can see evolutionary biologists. They do a lot of interesting work in how we evolve, how the evolution has changed our perception, changed our prejudice, changed our stereotype, and evolutionary psychology. They do interesting work as well. I think bringing different disciplines together, more interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work could be something that could be explored more, and also doing research in different settings. I think a lot of times our research is very limited. There is not much money in tourism research, so we try to find the easiest way, cheapest way to do our research, and then we limit our settings, right? We study just one-time study. We don't have longitudinal studies of people who travel, how their attitudes change, right? From they were young school children to all the way when they're old, right? So I think there should be more longitudinal study to keep track of how the role of tourism in peace building. And also, I think the research is more focused on host and guest, tourist and host. But there is not much research on tourist and tourist, how their attitude change. Research between tourist and non-tourist service providers. The interesting example is when you go to a country, the first person you see is a custom official, and who is probably the most rude person in the country, right? So the custom officials, your first interaction with custom official, that's how you build your attitude, right? Oh, these people are just awful, these people. That's how, and that these things. Probably there should be a better way to communicate, right? These people are not just checking your visa; they're making your first impression of the country, right? So I think these are just a few ideas, Christine.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for those responses. The subsequent question is, in our roles as tourists, in essence, what I want to ask is what should we be doing in terms of peace building? And so, Dr. Timothy, if I could direct this question to you. As global citizens and frequent tourists, what role can we all play, if any, in peace building?
Another thought-provoking and excellent question, Dr. Buzinde. I think years ago, in our school here at Arizona State University, I taught a course, in a summer course, a special topics course, and it was called The Art of Responsible Travel. And it really was something that was near and dear to my heart. And it took a lot of months to prepare and plan and provide case studies and concepts and everything that the students would learn over that summer course. And in preparing that course, I really learned that travel, as Dr. Farmaki and Dr. Nyaupane have mentioned, is really about connecting. It's really about contact. It's about exposing oneself to a bigger picture than what we're used to exposing ourselves to. And so in preparing for that course, I really had to dig deep and try to find how to be a responsible traveler, what that means, particularly for the student generations, and talking about things like cultural sensitivity and not being overly judgmental, and realizing that your way is not the only way or the best way necessarily. And in all relationships, in family relationships as well, we have to, that's good advice. But especially when we're talking about intercultural contact and connections with travel. So I think in answer to your question, it's behavior, acceptance of differences, being willing to be humble and say my way isn't necessarily the best way or the only way. And we know that tourists generally, and I'm generalizing, which I shouldn't be, but generally tourists are not the humblest people. You know, their concept is, you know, we pay to be here, and so we want better service, and we want X, Y, and Z, and all of this. And so, but in all honesty, I find that if you're humble, if you just let things go, you know, that delay of the airplane is going to go better. You're going to feel more inner peace. You're going to have more peace with the flight attendants and the gatekeepers at the airport. But also realizing that other people are people. People make mistakes, and we can just make the choice. It's a conscious choice to be humble, to be accepting of differences, and to be willing to take things as they come. And that's something that I've really had to work on, because I'm a very, very humble person, and I want you to know how proud I am of that. But other than that, people might not get that joke, but that's okay. In any case, I think that's really important, and not to have such high expectations, because if people don't meet those expectations, then it will often result in a disappointing experience. That's just some thoughts that I have about that.
Thank you, Dr. Timothy, for that response and for always accompanying us with humor. My last question for the panel, and then we'll open up to the questions from our wonderful audience members, is on this notion of the micro level. So we began this discussion with some level of discussion on the macro level, you know, nation state level. And I'd like for us now to go towards a discussion of the micro level. And some individuals on the panel have actually alluded to this earlier, but I'd like for us to delve a little deeper into this. How do each of you cultivate peace in your day-to-day, and what peace building advice do you have for our audience members?
Wow, that's a great question, Christine. So I think, as Dallen mentioned earlier, the peace should come at the individual level first, right? But the seeds of peace can be planted at the individual level. That could, you know, go to the family, to the community, to the society. I think that's how we can build peace. What do I do as a tourist? Individually, personally, be open-minded. Avoid stereotypes if you have any. I think all of us have stereotypes of some kind. And one way of avoiding that stereotype is, you know, I read Sapolsky's book on Behave, and he talked about essentialism and, you know, individualism. And if you look at a group, not as homogeneous group, but as an individual, that's going to help a lot, right? Instead of having, you know, individual as a part of group, look at individual as an individual, right? So that will just remove your stereotype right away. I think that's kind of thing is interesting. I think other thing I have is this priming. In psychology, they use this word priming, and they have done a lot of research on priming. And one study was, you know, they two group of students from same class. One group was asked, you know, one group was given the word like, you know, Florida and retirement and wrinkle face and things like that. Another group was given neutral word, and those group who had this elderly kind of world, they actually walk slowly. So that's the impact of you, what you think, what you read, what you see, that's very impactful, right? So I think watching too much news is distracting and makes you less peaceful. So what I do is actually I just spend 15 minutes in the morning, watch news, and don't watch news any part of the day, because what you hear in the news is the tip of iceberg. You don't read the whole story, right? And then they're just selling you the news, not informing you. So that's my advice.
Great advice. Other panel members?
I think as academics, we need to lead by example. And I've noticed that many researchers will study the peace and tourism nexus because they have been affected in a way by conflict. But it's very important to remove ourselves from personal situation and try to see at something as unbiased as possible and be impartial. And I think as educators, our role is very important in promoting peace through our profession. I don't think that in education any politics should be involved. So I've always advocated that, maybe not very successfully, or at least it wasn't perceived by others, in a positive manner, because I do live in a place that is affected by conflict. So I think maybe not everyone is ready to hear, the idea that we need to embrace peace and so on. But at least I'm trying on a daily basis and raising my kids to embrace peace, because I think it takes guts, to say no to a situation that in a way has for many societies become comfortable. Stick to a narrative. I think it takes one to be bold in order to take accountability. Hear the other side. There are always two sides to a coin. So yeah, on a personal level, that is what I try to do. And I do believe that in education, we need to really promote, these kind of ideas of justice, erasing inequalities, promoting peace, so on.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just kind of sum up my perspective as well. And I really appreciate the words of Dr. Nyaupane and Dr. Farmaki. And since they both brought it up, I'll start with the personal, as Anna mentioned with her children. I have 4 children, and I've tried raising them to be service oriented. And I'm of the firm belief that we will love and appreciate and respect those whom we serve. And so they've ever since they were small children, they have helped the elderly in our community and in our church. They have done service for cleaning the environment, a whole different range of things. And my wife and I have tried to really instill that in them, that service is so key, of giving of ourselves and helping not just the earth, but society in general. And so in that sense, and I agree with Anna wholeheartedly with that we have to try to raise a generation of good citizens, of people who respect one another, even if we're different. Professionally, I just refuse to speak politics when I travel. And I feel myself as that I'm a peacemaker. I'm not a conflict creator. And so even in my family growing up as a young person myself, I was sort of the peacemaker between my siblings and parents, etc. And so I've always had this self-imposed role of peacemaker. And I still carry that with me. I avoid conflict, I avoid contention, and always try my very best to be optimistic and look on the bright side. So when I travel, which is a lot, and I attend conferences and meet people, I do my very best to avoid talking about politics, because it's such a hotly contested thing. And here in the United States right now, it's probably the worst in the world. And so when people say, oh, you're from the United States, what do you think about so-and-so? Or what do you think about so-and-so? I'm like, I don't really want to talk about it. Let's talk about something more positive. And so I try to do my role in trying to keep the discussion at an apolitical level because I think that we have so much more in common everywhere around the world. Everywhere I go, we're human beings. We all have challenges. We all have opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And we have so much more in common than we have differences. And I just, me personally, it's a great question, Dr. Buzinde. It's the way of how do we exemplify this in our own lives? And that's how I do it, personally as well as professionally.
Wonderful, thank you all. In summation, in essence, you're all alerting us, our audience members, I should say, to the fact that peace building requires intentionality, as Dr. Nyaupane mentioned, requires courage, as Dr. Farmaki mentioned. It requires a service-oriented mentality, as Dr. Timothy mentioned. I think these are all great angles through which one can begin to construct peace within their personal and or professional spheres, but also think of ways in which they could work at a larger macro level scale on the work that is needed within our global village. We'll now begin addressing questions from our audience members, and we received a number of questions already. And so panel members, with your permission, I'm going to transition to those questions from our panel members. The first question is from Lox. Lox, thanks for your question. And the question is as follows. Can peace tourism overcome separatism? Can peace tourism overcome separatism?
Maybe I can answer that.
Please go ahead.
In my view, yes and no. Yes, in terms of an individual level, but at a national or international level, we need to acknowledge that there are other things that also influence the perceptions and attitudes of people. So there's education, there's media. So I don't think that tourism alone is enough. It's adequate to bring about peace, but it does have a role to play.
Thank you. I agree. And like and Anna mentioned a while ago that, fake news and the media plays such an important role in stoking conflict because it's good for ratings. It's a good, it's good for visibility, et cetera, exposure. And so there are so many different things that on a person-to-person level, we get along. And actually research and empirical evidence shows that's true. Even people on opposite sides of conflict. But like Anna said, at the national level, there's got to be more to it than that. It has potential, but it's not the answer.
I think it depends, right? Not all tourism helps building peace, right? So I think it depends what kind of tourism, what kind of settings. So tourism can be, going somewhere, meeting with locals, embracing their cultures, their values, sharing your ideas and values, and that could be one kind of tourism. Another kind could be just to go as a mass tourist and to have no understanding of locals. So I think again it depends. But I agree with Dallen and Anna. It's a mixed.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question is from Kaisian. It says, what metrics can be used to evaluate or measure the effectiveness of tourism in promoting peace in destinations? What metrics can be used to evaluate or measure the effectiveness of tourism in promoting peace in destinations? It's a good question in terms of methodology.
Excellent question. I think there has been some metrics of attitude change, but I think it could be, these are mostly research-oriented metrics, but not very applied industry-oriented metrics. And I think this could be more simplified and make it more industry-oriented metrics that could be developed from the existing attitude change metrics they use in measuring this, prejudice kind of measurement.
Yeah, I think from the applied perspective, there are examples, case studies actually in the literature of certain tourism services that have collaborated between, I'll say, traditional enemies, but they've collaborated to develop a very prosperous business, for example. That has not just economic implications, but political implications We've seen this between before the current conflict with Israel and Palestine, between Israelis and Palestinians, developing tourism trails, developing tourism lodging and associations, and things like that. And that has really been instrumental in bringing people together and seeing people's other perspectives. So I think collaboration on a business-to-business level as well, or within a mixed community, is something that would help pass it along. I'm not sure about the measurement of it, but I think it really, something that all of our presentations today and the discussion has kind of shown me is that it's a case-by-case basis, because every situation is very different. Every situation has variables that affect conflict, that affect peace, and etc.
I believe there is a global peace index, and there has been attempts to measure the contribution of tourism to that, in light of that peace index in certain countries. And I think tourist arrivals to a specific country were used, but I don't think that is enough. Because it really depends, from one context to another. So we can't just assume that because we have X number of tourists visiting a country, that is peaceful, that actually contributes to peace. So there are other aspects that we need to consider, but again, that will be on a context basis.
And I believe this question is along the same lines, which is looking at both the distinction between local versus international. And the question goes as follows: is there a difference as we look at peace and sustainability if we're comparing and contrasting local context versus multinational based tourism? So does it make a difference to peace and sustainability if we're talking about locally based versus multinational tourism?
I think it does. Obviously, like Gyan was talking about earlier, contact theory, and excuse me, the closer we are socially, if that social distance between the visitors and the visited is short, there's going to tend to be less conflict. And so maybe domestic and local tourism, as Mark has asked, could in fact be less conflicted or than otherwise. But then again, if the social distance is great between the visitors and the visited, then there's also opportunities to create bridges, to build bridges, because there is a gap there. That's kind of an abstract way of looking at it, but I think that the scale, if it's global, multinational tourism or cross-national tourism versus local or regional tourism, I think that what some of the theoretical stuff Gyan was talking about is really key there in interpreting, that social distance or that contact theory. If you don't know what's on the other side, you're going to be ignorant, you're going to be prejudiced, you're going to be judgmental. But if you know what's on the other side and you're familiar with it, you're probably going to be less of those things.
I think there has been some studies in terms of looking at sustainability, tourists traveling to their one country versus other countries. I think those people who travel regionally are more sustainable than people traveling, long distance, right? And I think during COVID, we learned that is very important to, travel locally to support local businesses. You have, less carbon footprint and things like that. And I think that could be applied in tourism context, in peace context as well. So you can't just build peace going to another continent. You have to build peace within your country, within your culture first.
The literature does suggest that, if there is some kind of cultural similarity between opposing groups, that it's easier to achieve reconciliation and build peace. But I think there are also other factors involved, like political tension or distrust, how long a conflict has lasted. So it's not an easy question to answer because, again, we go back to the context, which is very specific to a case. So, yeah.
All right. Wonderful. All right, so we'll take one more question from our audience members. And the question is from Matthew, and it is as follows. Do you believe that examining the impact of tourism on children would be interesting with respect to the implications for future prospects for peace?
That's a really good question. And you know, we know that early life experiences affect the rest of our lives. I mean, that's obviously I'm psychotic, you know, and I because of my young life, and so some of you who know me know how I behave, and a lot of that comes from what happened to me as a child. But on the more serious side, looking at this content, and there has been some research on peace among children. And when children play together, they become friends, and they're oblivious to the politics around them. So what really matters is that they're children, they get along, they talk, they get to know one another. I think this is a great question, Matthew, because exposure of children to differentness is key. If children are only exposed to what they see every day, the people who look like them, the people who behave like them, etc., it's not going to stretch their minds very far. It's not going to necessarily expand their worldview as they grow older. And then when they do experience that later, it can come as a bit of a culture shock. So I do believe exposing young children to differentness and otherness is key. And tourism can definitely have. I know people who took their children with them all over the world. And those kids now, as adults, are just more open-minded. They're more able to be, to accept differentness, and they're less judgmental. And so I think it's really, really key that anybody who has children or young people in your lives, you know, to expose them to differentness, because that does, as Gyan mentioned, it does reduce prejudices and it does reduce biases. That's my comment.
Thank you.
I think as a father of two children, I totally agree with Dallen. I think exposing them early enough helps. I think the students, the study abroad programs, and students field trips and school field trips. These are really good ideas to expose young people to different cultures and different countries. And yeah, I agree.
Wonderful. There was an interesting story this morning from ASU News faculty who are doing research on precisely that. Today, I don't know how many of you saw that, assessing children's perception of what's happening in the US politics right now. And so I urge our audience members to go and take a look at that news story in ASU News. Well, thank you, audience members, for the wonderful questions that you shared with our panel, and thank you, panel members, for responding to those questions. The discussion today has captured theoretical and methodological accounts. We talked about micro level and macro level scales and how they impact tourism and sustainability in this discussion of peace and peace building. And I really feel as though the panel members did a great job in broadening our understanding of this notion of the nexus between tourism, peace, and sustainability. I will end our webinar with a direct quote from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General. In his message today on World Tourism Day, he says the following, and I quote, "Sustainable tourism can transform communities, creating jobs, fostering inclusion, and strengthening local economies. By valuing and preserving cultural and natural heritage, it can help reduce tensions and nurture peaceful coexistence. Tourism can also promote economic interdependence between neighbors, encouraging cooperation and peaceful development. At the same time, tourism broadens horizons. Every traveler can be an ambassador, engaging respectfully with local populations, recognizing our diversity and shared humanity, and the values that unite us all. As we celebrate tourism, let's travel responsibly, build bridges, and promote mutual respect among cultures and nations. Together, we can harness the power of tourism to advance peace and prosperity for all. Folks, I hope you all enjoyed the webinar. Many thanks to our audience members yet again who joined us today.